Hello and welcome back to the Atlas Agency's continuing investigation of the Path to Carcosa cycle for Arkham Horror the card game. I'm your host Brandon, and today I'll be talking through the new player cards from the Unspeakable Oath, Mythos Pack number 2 in the Carcosa cycle. This pack has 12 new player cards, and overall it's a pretty good expansion on the player card front, with a fair number of useful cards. So let's dive in and talk through each of them. We'll start this look with the Guardian class. Their level 0 card is Trench Knife. This is a 1-cost melee weapon asset that occupies a single hand slot. Has 2 abilities. The first is passive and just says that engage actions you perform do not provoke attacks of opportunity. The second is a fight action you can take with a weapon that gives you plus X combat for the attack, where X is the number of enemies that are engaged with you. No bonus damage on this one, just a combat boost. So if you use the engage action while you're already engaged with one or more enemies, then ordinarily that triggers attacks of opportunity from those enemies that are already engaged with you. Not the new enemy that you're using the action to take on, just the ones that you already had engaged with you when you started. So this blocks those attacks. That's a passive bonus that applies even if you aren't actually using Trench Knife to make attacks, which I think is nice. I've dismissed weapons in the past that don't deal bonus damage, but I think Trench Knife has kind of made me consider the value of having an offhand weapon, something to supplement whatever your main weapon is. We've seen a few cards in Carcosa that support firearm weapons. Sleight of Hand from the deluxe box is one. It doesn't reference the firearm trait directly, but it works well with them since you can drop one, spend all its ammo, and then it bounces back to your hand for you to replay and basically recharge it. There's also Eat Lead from the announcement for Pack 6 Dim Carcosa, which directly references the firearm trait. I think in a way Trench Knife is another kind of firearm support. If you're running Machete, then Trench Knife is a bad fit because you're generally going to want to engage enemies one at a time just to keep Machete's damage bonus going. But if you're instead leaning into cards like 45 Automatic and 32 Colt, then on top of giving you attack avoidance on engage actions, Trench Knife can also serve as a way to conserve ammo on those enemies with odd health totals. So you don't have to waste a bullet if you only need to do one more damage to kill something. Is that benefit worth the cost of giving up a hand slot, plus the resource and the action that it takes you to play this? I'm not really sure on that. At a higher player count, I think maybe it might be. I'm not completely sold, but I'm kind of wanting to give this a try and see how that works out. The second Guardian card in this pack is Ambush. This is a level 1 event that costs 2 resources. When you play it, you attach it to your location. If at any point there are no investigators at the location it's attached to, then you have to discard it. And then it's got a forced ability that triggers after an enemy spawns at that location, and it deals 2 damage to that enemy, and then you discard Ambush. I'm really interested in this one. You're basically getting to pre-play an automatically successful 2 damage attack against an enemy, as long as someone's going to hang around in the room long enough to get it to trigger. There's no restriction on this about it only applying to non-elite enemies, so if you know you're going to have a boss fight, you can get a jump start on killing the boss before it actually spawns. The trigger on this is forced, so if another enemy spawns before the one you wanted to use this on, you have to apply the ambush. You can't opt out and wait for the next enemy. It does seem to work best when you already know a scenario, but I can think of several where this seems really useful. Anytime you know the agenda deck's going to spawn an enemy on top of you, this seems pretty easy to set up the round before, especially since the agenda advances before you draw your normal encounter card for the round, so there's no risk of another enemy coming along and messing it up. Shuffling over to the Seeker class, their level 0 card is Charles Ross Esquire. This is a 2-resource ally asset with 2 abilities. The first says that you can spend resources to pay for item assets played by other investigators at your location, and the second ability is a fast trigger where you can exhaust him to reduce the cost of the next item asset played by an investigator at your location by 1. Also has 1 health and 2 sanity. I talked about Charles back in my Path to Carcosa cycle introduction video. Back then he was a future card that I was excited to try out. Since then I have had a chance to play with him. A friend and I played through a Knight of the Zealot campaign using Jenny Barnes and William York. I played the Jenny deck and I ran Ross to try to help William pay for items. I feel like that was good, but maybe not great. It did help Yorick set up faster in the early game, but usually before long we had to split to different locations, and then I found myself wishing Ross was another ally. I think he may work better for that purpose in a 3 or 4 player game, with more investigators to potentially benefit from his help, and a greater likelihood that you'll share a location with another investigator. He does have the Patron trait. I think I originally was under the impression that this pack would feature one patron for each class, but that was my error. I was reading things into the announcement article that weren't there. Instead, it looks like we are getting one patron per class, but spread over the whole cycle instead of all in one pack. We got the Mystic Patron in Pack 1. In this pack, we have Charles, plus one other patron that I'll talk about shortly. And in Pack 3, we have another one that's already been spoiled. The common thread with these patron allies is resource gaining, and overall, I think it's a pretty cool suite. Next up is for Warrant. This is a level 1 event for 0 resources. It's fast, and you play it when you draw a non-weakness treachery card. Place one of your clues on your location, then cancel that card's revelation effect. Also has one willpower icon. I think this is great. Ward of Protection is pretty widely accepted to be a solid card. This is the same effect, but with a lower resource cost and a different drawback. I do think having to drop a clue is a slightly worse drawback than the one horror from Ward of Protection, but Seekers can recover from that better than anyone. And note that because of the way this is worded with the word then, this only works if you do actually have a clue to drop. But if it costs you one extra action to investigate to recover the clue after you block something like an Ancient Evils, that's a pretty good trade. So I expect this one's going to get quite a bit of use going forward. Our first rogue card in this pack is our other patron. This is Dario El Amin, Unscrupulous Investor, coming here to shake your hand. He costs 4 resources to play. While you have 10 or more resources unspent in your pool, you get +1 willpower and +1 intellect. He's got an action that you can take. You exhaust him if there are no enemies at your location to gain 2 resources. Also has 2 health and 2 sanity. At the moment, I don't think I'm sold on this guy. In order to get that stat boost, you're basically giving up access to 14 resources, the 4 that you spend to play him, and then 10 more that you just have to sit on. Though I guess later on, if you don't need the stat boost anymore, you can turn around and spend those 10 resources. That's pretty expensive, though, and on top of that, he's up against some tough competition in the ally slot. If he has a place right now, I would guess it would be in a Safina deck. That willpower boost would be useful for her. At 4 willpower, she needs a little bump to use things like Shriveling effectively, and I think Safina is well equipped to handle the resource requirement too. Now, what would be interesting to me would be if we got some later cards that had that same 10 or more resources trigger. To me, that would really up his appeal. If the same 10 resources could turn on more than one card, that takes a little bit of the sting out, and the resource gaining ability on Dario in that case would be a way to help you get that 10 resources for all of those cards. For now, I'm just not sure that I'm interested in trying to run him. Our second rogue card is a level 2 version of the event Sneak Attack, which originally appeared in the core set as a level 0 card. This costs 2 resources, and it deals 2 damage to an enemy that's not engaged with you at your location. The original Sneak Attack also did 2 damage, but it required that the enemy you targeted was exhausted, so basically either you or another player needed to have evaded the enemy before you could use it. Test-free damage is really good, but because of that exhausted requirement, there was really still a test involved, the evade test, barring a free evade from something like a stray cat. Dropping that requirement down to just needing them not to be engaged with you really does improve the card's usability in multiplayer. Now it can just be an enemy that's engaged with someone else, which is a really easy condition to satisfy. So that makes this a great upgrade. I didn't tend to use the old Sneak Attack very often, but I think this new version is going to be worth it to experience in a multiplayer game. I'm looking forward to trying it out, especially in Safina as something to copy with the Painted World. I also want to mention that this has 1 extra combat icon over the level 0 version, so now it has 2, which I think is a pretty useful thing as well. For the Mystic class, we have Storm of Spirits. This is a spell event that costs 3 resources. It initiates a fight action, which uses willpower instead of combat. If you succeed, instead of its standard damage, this attack deals 2 damage to each enemy at your location. Any additional damage is dealt to the attacked enemy. If a whammy symbol is revealed during the attack, you deal 1 damage to each investigator at your location. So it's basically an area of effect damage spell. I think we only have one other card like that, Dynamite Blast, though really the 2 cards are pretty different. Unlike Dynamite Blast, Storm of Spirits does require that you pass a skill test to use it, though it only targets 1 enemy, so you get to pick whichever target has the lowest combat value. I think this card is going to be pretty popular. It's an especially great fit for Safina. If she can get a copy in her palette along with a Painted World, she could potentially fire this twice in 1 turn and really lay waste to a big group of enemies. This may be a nice thing to have if you ever find yourself ganged up on in the woods by an entire squad of, say, 5 cultists. This next card is interesting. This is a level 1 version of the core set card Book of Shadows. This is actually the first time we've seen an older card get downgraded in an expansion. The original Book of Shadows was level 3, so this has dropped 2 levels. There were a few differences between the two cards. The original version cost 4 resources, so this is slightly cheaper at 3. However, it's not really cheaper because its ability to add a charge to a spell asset now costs you 1 resource each time you use it. It also no longer has that ability granting you an extra arcane slot, and it has fewer skill icons, just 1 intellect now. Probably the most important part of this card is that being level 1 means Daisy can take it now as a tome for her to use her ability on. That's pretty cool. She can buy 1 copy of this and then rely on Research Librarian to tutor for it. Right now, the likely spells for Daisy to be recharging would be either Shriveling or maybe Scrying. That's somewhat helpful, but I think more important than that, we've seen that there are several new spells in the Seeker class that are coming along later in the Carcosa cycle. I think this complements those spells even better. In Pack 5, for example, Seekers are going to get Arcane Insight, a spell that lets you spend a charge as a fast trigger to reduce the shroud value of your location by 2 for an investigator's turn. With this, Daisy could easily trigger that every round and really keep the shroud value of her location suppressed over the course of a whole game. So level 1 Book of Shadows is maybe okay for now, but by the end of the cycle, I think this is going to be in a very different and much better place. Survivor's level 0 card is Fight or Flight. This is a 1 resource event that's fast, and you play it only during your turn. Until the end of the round, you get +X combat and +X agility, where X is the amount of horror on you, and note that it doesn't have any skill icons on it. This is a strong card, and I expect it'll be a staple of the Survivor class from here forward. I can definitely see myself making space for this in a lot of investigators. This is potentially going to give you a pretty large bonus, and it lasts for your full turn. I think +3 or +4 is pretty reasonable, and it may even be larger than that, depending on your investigator and how the game's going. It's either a solid late-game panic button that'll get you out of a tough spot, or else a buff that you would take into a boss fight. I can see this taking the place of either Overpower or Manual Dexterity in a lot of decks. Also, one of the themes in the Carcosa scenarios is that they get tougher the more horror you've taken, so this provides a counterbalance to that by getting better as you lose your sanity. Even outside Carcosa, though, I think this is a good card. I know this is coming on the heels of the similar card Anatomical Diagrams from the last pack, and I was kind of dismissive of that card. Maybe I'm still not giving Anatomical Diagrams enough credit, but I do feel like Fight or Flight is a stronger card. We have another Treachery canceling card in this set. This is a Test of Will. It's level 1 and costs 1 resource. It's fast. You play it when an investigator at your location draws a non-weakness Treachery card. Note that unlike Ward of Protection and Forewarned, this one works on cards that other investigators at your location draw, so those other 2 are limited to just the cards that you draw, so nice bonus here. Cancel that card's Revelation effect, exile a Test of Will. Exile means you remove it from your deck after you use it, then you either have to spend another experience to repurchase it, or you just replace it with a level 0 card before the next scenario. So that's basically a one-shot Treachery cancellation effect. As I've said, Treachery cancellation is great, and this feels like a fair effect for a 1 experience point exile card. For me, though, I worry that Loss Aversion is going to kick in strongly while I'm holding this card, and I'll be overly reluctant to actually use it, short of a big neon sign that says I'm definitely going to die if I don't cancel this one specific Treachery. For that reason, I'm less excited by this than I am by Forewarned, though I do still think I'll buy this fairly often, and I recognize that the ability to cancel someone else's Treachery is pretty significant. If nothing else, I'll want to take 2 of these into the last scenario of each campaign, once that exile effect no longer matters because the campaign's going to be over. It does have a willpower icon too, so if nothing else, you can always just commit it and save the card for another scenario. Little bit of trivia on this one. Fantasy Flight likes to drop little references to its other LCGs here and there, and this is one of those references. A Test of Will is a card from the Lord of the Rings LCG that has a similar effect. It's sort of the basic Revelation effect canceling card from that game's core set. The Arkham card here echoes that card's artwork too. They've both got a guy who's looking down from a high spot with his back turned to the camera. Survivors actually get a second level 1 exile card in this pack. This is Devil's Luck, a 1 resource event that's fast. You play it when you're dealt damage and or horror to cancel up to 10 damage and or horror just dealt to you, then you exile Devil's Luck. If you don't want to use it for that effect, you can also contribute it to a test for a single agility icon. I like this one. It feels like a worthy effect for a 1 experience exile card. I think the decision to pick one of these up may be kind of campaign-driven, though. In the Dunwich campaign, this is a great insurance policy against the treachery beyond the veil, and I can really see picking one of these up early in that campaign. It's kind of a coin flip whether or not it makes it into your hand when you actually need it, but the card Resourceful from Path to Carcosa can really help with that. I'm not sure anything in the Knight of the Zealot or Carcosa campaigns really makes me want to have this, though. Of course, we're only partway through Carcosa's release, so there's still time for that to change. Overall, though, I do think it's a neat card. And finally, I've saved what I think is the best for last, my favorite card from this pack, Calling in Favors. This is a 1-resource, level 0 neutral event. Choose an ally asset you control and return it to your hand. Then search the top 9 cards of your deck for an ally asset and play it, reducing its cost by X. X is the cost of the ally asset that you return to your hand. Then shuffle your deck. And if you're feeling silly, you can just commit it instead for an agility icon or an intellect icon. I love this card. Let me just talk you through some plays that you can make with it. First, if you're running allies with abilities that trigger when they enter play, normally those are Seeker allies, then this not only lets you tutor for that new ally, but it also bounces your original ally back to your hand, so you can play it again and re-trigger its comes into play ability. So you could play Laboratory Assistant to draw 2 cards, then play Calling in Favors to maybe pull in a nice ally like a Dr. Milan, and then later replay that Lab Assistant again to trigger its ability and draw 2 more cards. Or if you're a Guardian with a level 2 Beat Cop that's already been used to deal out some damage and it's kind of spent, then you can use Calling in Favors to return that to your hand to try to draw out either a replacement Beat Cop or maybe a Brother Xavier. Those allies are expensive, so the discount is very nice, and you get the original Beat Cop back to your hand so that you can replay it later at full strength and deal even more damage with it. There's also Ashcan Pete, who starts with Duke in play. That means on turn 1 you can use Calling in Favors to return Duke to your hand and tutor into your deck for an ally. I'm running a deck like this right now that bounces Duke to reliably get a Leo DeLuca into play on turn 1. Then you just have to replay Duke for 2 resources. You do have to watch out for things like Crypt Chill. I've already had an immediate pushed into the beyond wipe away my turn 1 Leo DeLuca, but I think it's kind of a fun play. It's also another way to get rid of a Mystic ally that's accumulated some Doom. You can always just kill an Alyssagram off, but with this you get that discount on your replacement ally. As you can see, there are a lot of fun uses like this that are possible with this card. I think the bouncing of the ally back to your hand really elevates this above being just a prepared for the worst for allies. I foresee myself running this in a lot of Guardian and Seeker decks from here on out, and I'm excited to get to play with it more. And with that, we're done with this look. As always, thanks for watching the Atlas Agency, and good luck in your own investigations of the Carcosa cycle. For more Arkham content, consider subscribing to this YouTube channel. You can also check out the Atlas Agency WordPress over at atlasofarkham.wordpress.com. Thanks again!